Welcome to the Smart Driving Cars podcast. Thanks for joining us. We have an interesting guest and discussion planned once again. This edition is sponsored by the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. For more information, head to motoetf.com. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with the Faculty Chair of Autonomous Vehicle Engineering at Princeton University, Alain Kornhauser. Hi, Alain.
Hey, good morning, Fred. Good morning, everyone.
And we are happy to have with us Marc Scribner, Senior Transportation Policy Analyst at the Reason Foundation. Thanks for taking the time, Marc.
Thank you, Fred and Alain, for having me back.
Oh, great having you, Marc.
Well, let's start out with some background about the Reason Foundation. Always good for the audience, Marc. It goes back more than 40 years, and the transportation-related work that you're doing there.
Yeah, so Reason was started back in the 70s, and the founder, Bob Poole, who many listeners may be familiar with, has had a long interest in emerging technologies that could be applied to infrastructure and transportation and to make that better. So Bob, back in the 80s, was one of the pioneers of high occupancy toll lanes and public-private partnerships to finance infrastructure enhancements. And those ideas have taken off. Unfortunately, Bob is based in the US, and a lot of those ideas have gained a lot more credence in our peer countries rather than here in America, but we're starting to see more interest in these ideas out of recognition that the status quo isn't working. And that's sort of the focus of Reason's transportation work, is trying to find these innovative solutions to these long-standing problems in transportation infrastructure.
Well, on top, in the latest edition of Alain's Smart Driving Cars newsletter, is a commentary that you've written titled "How the Biden Administration and Congress Can Pave the Path for Automated Vehicles." Give us a little overview to start with.
Well, I think the main point I was trying to make is that the work that has been done primarily in the executive branch over the last two administrations really sets the Biden administration up to continue that work. And really, we're reaching the point where we're seeing some of the initial deployments of automated driving system technology. The overarching theme, and what I was trying to get at, is the Biden administration doesn't need to reinvent the wheel. There's been a lot of competency built in the Department of Transportation over the last two administrations. So to continue that work, but also to partner with Congress. Congress has tried and failed to pass comprehensive federal highly automated vehicle legislation. There seems to be interest in trying to do that again, and I think the Biden administration should work closely with them, building on what has been learned over the last several years, and really come up with a solid framework that can help us move forward and hopefully usher in more and more deployments.
I guess what we're talking about is what's needed or not needed when it comes to legislation or regulation.
Right. And that's a tricky and often unsatisfactory area for folks, because the kind of information that we need to do the sorts of regulating that we're accustomed to of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, doing is performance standards, technical standards. Those technical standards, by and large, are under development. They're not ripe for regulatory incorporation. And even once they are ripe for regulatory incorporation, so say the SAE International puts out another standard, or some other standard setting body puts out a technical standard, it's still going to take time to go through the rulemaking process, perhaps 8 to 10 years. So there's going to be this interim period, where we can't competently regulate in the same way that NHTSA sets minimum performance standards for conventional vehicles. So what do we do then is the real interesting question. And I think that part of that is trying to use the existing regulatory tools that NHTSA has, namely the exemption process, to try to collect as much of that information that they need to build a safety regulatory framework around these technologies. So that's I guess that's the main point of what I'm trying to get at here, is that there is going to be this interim period where we can't do things like you hear activist groups sometimes call for a vision test, and then you ask them, what does the vision test mean? And they say, well, they don't really know. And what they're really talking about, if you take them at face value, is a technical standard and a standardized test procedure to verify compliance. And we don't have those tools yet.
Certainly for whatever my opinion matters in this, I think I agree with Mark. We made a lot of progress over the last two administrations, especially near the end of the two administrations ago, Obama, and really through the Trump administration, we really evolved. We evolved from a situation in which, at least at the beginning of the Obama administration, not to maybe we'll argue about this, Mark, but the thought was that we could have things out there in the infrastructure that would tell all of us exactly what the hell to do and monitor all this, and we'd all be so happy go lucky and all safe and so on. And I think the realization of the technology is that, my goodness, we're not going to do this with communications, or at least we can't get started with communications because the start is at the end. You got to have it to do it, and you can't evolve it. So, how the hell do we do that with, 340 million people in the US trying to move around? I mean, it's just like goofy. So we said, okay, we're going to have our vehicles do it one at a time and basically drive defensively out there. So they don't go out there and just crash. And I think that's been the evolution. But of course, the policy problem is the set regulation. You've got to know your unknowns, and we don't know our unknowns, and we've got to figure out our unknowns. And how else do you figure out your unknowns? But put your toe in the water to see if it's cold, or before you jump in, and all these things. That's the practical nature, I think, right? We're on common ground on this, right?
Yeah, I think so. And you raise a really good point about the past focus on smart infrastructure, and obviously there's still interest in that topic, but we had the George H.W. Bush administration, Clinton administration, George W. Bush administration, and the beginning of the Obama administration thinking that was the future. And then you're right, it was during the Obama administration where you started to see this shift. And I think a lot of it has to do with the practical realities of our transportation infrastructure networks. We have, I don't buy into the kind of pervasive claim that we have this crumbling infrastructure crisis, but we do have real needs of doing the kind of the traditional things of maintaining the dumb infrastructure, of filling potholes. You can look at the maintenance backlogs that we have across the country, up and down our surface transportation networks. And then you start thinking, it's like, well, we're going to put a new smart infrastructure obligation on top of these road agencies now. I mean, that doesn't seem, that seems very unrealistic that they're going to sort of port on another network on top of the existing network when they still haven't gotten a handle on the long-term needs of say reconstruction of the interstate over the next 20 years, estimated to cost at least $1 trillion. No one has figured out how to pay for that. And they're just talking about the kinds of infrastructure that was being built over the last 50 years. I mean, obviously there's some improvements in pavement technology and in engineering, but there isn't that much different there, and we're still having trouble figuring out how to deal with that issue. So putting this other smart infrastructure issue on top of that, I think just seemed like a really, really heavy lift. And you're right. We saw this, this automation technology come around where we could perhaps get these benefits without doing a major new infrastructure rollout. And I think that offers a lot of appeal to, both the auto companies who would make this stuff and have to depend on a smart infrastructure, but also the infrastructure managers who are really struggling at, realistically, can we build out something like this when we have all these other unmet needs?
But I'll go even farther. Look, fill the potholes, put paint out there, put signs that we can read so that we can use them better. Right now, everybody out there could. I mean, how many times are we out there? Where in the hell are the lines on the road? I can't see them. I mean, come on, put some paint out there. I can't read the signs. For me to do, for all of us to do that are out there now, that can have instantaneous value. But for some reason, somebody thought, oh my goodness, that isn't who knows what enough. It isn't STEM enough, or how to do, or what to do, or whatever is smart city. I mean, come on, and do that. And guess what? If you do that, then maybe we can make the sensors that have the one vehicle go out there and also be able to read them the way we read them. No, I mean, go, Mark.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I mean, we saw with during the Obama administration, the proposed rule on vehicle-to-vehicle communications that came out of NHTSA and that was subsequently shelved by the Trump administration. If you look, I mean, the overly optimistic regulatory impact analysis, the sort of cost benefit analysis of that rule said that we would not break even on costs and benefits. So it would not be net positive until at least 8 years after the mandate went into effect. And you're absolutely right. We can do things right now that provide immediate benefits to road users. And so I think that is we can actually start realizing these very real benefits. But two, I think that makes it an easier sell for politicians, because it's very hard, as we've seen in other debates, for politicians to go out and say, well, we need to do this now, so we might benefit a decade or decades from now. I mean, that's not, that doesn't work well in politics.
Let's see, it doesn't work well in Wall Street either. They're sitting
it doesn't
there
work well
quarterly. You go to Washington, it's every 2 years. You start telling me 8, that's beyond any Senate.
There is supposedly being worked on a huge infrastructure bill that's going to be introduced at some point. Is there anything that you would want to see in there that's related to this technology?
Well, I think the big thing that Congress can do right now, they should have done it a few years ago, but is to add a new federal motor vehicle safety standard exemption category for automated vehicles and for automated driving system equipped vehicles. Right now, you've got under most of the exemption categories. So if a manufacturer has a non-compliant vehicle or vehicle technology and wants to sell it to consumers or deploy it into interstate commerce, it has to go to NHTSA and go through this process of obtaining an exemption. And once they achieve that exemption, though, under most of these categories, they can only produce up to 2,500 vehicles per year over a 2-year period. And then there's an optional or a potential 2-year renewal. So you're talking per manufacturer, 10,000 vehicles over 4 years if they get the renewal after they obtain the original exemption. That's not helpful if we're trying to scale in along the lines of what Neuro has suggested in their report last year, that we may need by 2030 to meet demand for automated parcel delivery of their little, RX2 or R2X pod low-speed vehicles, electric vehicles. 250,000 to 2 million by 2030 is what they had in their report, and we can't get there under the current exemption regime. So I recommend that Congress create a new exemption category that allows manufacturers to produce at least 100,000 vehicles per year under their this new exemption category. And I think they should keep manufacturers should have to demonstrate that their vehicles would meet an equivalent level of safety or better, as most exemption categories currently do. I think that's important. But here's, I think, the other thing that a lot of people have missed in the exemption debate as it's played out in Washington is that, and if you've seen the recent things that NHTSA has been doing, you can sort of understand where this is going. It's that data that manufacturers would provide to NHTSA in order to obtain an exemption, that is exactly the type of information NHTSA would want to use to develop regulatory actual rules, actual federal motor vehicle safety standards down the line. So, not only would this potentially get these safer vehicles, if they are demonstrated to be safer, out to consumers more rapidly, NHTSA can take that information that they use to grant that exemption and start working on these longer term rulemaking projects that ultimately we'll need if we want to integrate this technology into the automotive safety and performance regulatory ecosystem. So, that is the fact that this is a great information collection tool, the exemption process for NHTSA, should not be ignored in this debate.
Okay, Mark, you've just told us the benefit associated with extending this, okay? So with everything, there's benefit and there's risk. Where's the risk? I don't see any risk. Neuro would still have to, if anything happens, they're at fault, they're responsible, they'd have to pick up the tab. NHTSA can sit there and watch them to see if they're going over the edge or not going over the edge and keep it from becoming a total disaster, whatever. What's the cost? Why isn't this just not a no-brainer?
Well, another thing another point I made in the report and then in the commentary was that it's going to be tricky for politicians to avoid collateral policy damage, not because there aren't some very clear answers to a admittedly limited number of questions on this right now, but because we have these legacy special interest groups that have all sorts of competing biases that make it impossible to meet all of their demands. So we see this from a variety of groups. We saw this is why Congress's previous attempt at this failed. You had a variety of special interests who wanted favors to come out of this bill for them that don't really make sense in the straightforward policy discussion of this, but they wanted to bolt on their pet projects. And that, I think, is a very real risk. The sausage making of Washington does not give me a ton of confidence that they can get this done. But if they recognize that we know there are these discrete issues that we have enough information on to make, I think, wise decisions, if they stay focused, they can do it. But if they go down the path where they're going to try to, make deals with every lobbyist in town, then this may not go so well. Now, I think NHTSA is more immune to that. The executive branch is a bit more immune to that than Congress. And it's possible that NHTSA can do a lot of this on its own, but it would be nice if we could get the legislative and executive branches on the same board cooperating on this rather than leaving it all to the devices of the well-meaning, but sometimes they need some assistance, folks in the executive branch.
Yeah, but that sausage making exists with every piece of legislation. It's a constant. Is it more intense here? I mean, who's out there saying that a neuro vehicle is something I've taken away my market share because I have a push cart or something? And protect my push cart. Is that where it's coming from? Well, hey, again, I'm not a policy guy. So I'm an engineer. I do numbers.
Well, one thing you have advocated, Alain, in the past is the need for perhaps a new agency
Yeah, well, we might get to that one, but that's, I mean, then, oh my goodness, then you do have all the vested interests in the existing agencies and power redistribution and all that stuff. Yeah, yes, I throw that one out there, but I realize that there's nothing but minefields on that one. But Mark, what about it?
Well, I think NHTSA is capable of doing this, and I think long term, and this wouldn't happen anytime soon, mainly because you can't write ADS specific federal motor vehicle safety standards right now. But some of the automakers have suggested creating a new 600 series of federal motor vehicle safety standards, and then presumably you'd have a dedicated office at NHTSA to deal with those issues. Now, that's not ready for prime time, and it won't be anytime soon, but that might be the kind of compromise, because as you just said, if we create a new modal administration within the Department of Transportation, that could make it more likely that it would be captured by the folks who are interested in this specific technology. But also, I'm not sure the track record of standing up these modal administrations really shows that there's a ton of benefit. I don't know how much greater benefit we get from having a federal motor carrier safety administration versus the old Federal Highway Administration sort of freight truck safety office. So, maybe having an administrator focused on that would deliver better results. I'm just not, I don't see, automatic benefits anyway from going down that path, and this kind of NHTSA approach in the future, when we actually have the technical standards and standardized test procedures, that might make more sense. But I think we have problems with conflicts in existing federal motor vehicle safety standards right now that NHTSA should be, and they are working on updating. So that might be, at least I think the near-term focus should be on some of those legacy issues.
Yeah, I mean, the federal motor carrier, I mean, we have public and private, corporate and all of us. So, that's probably was most of the initiative. You have to deal with the folks that are trying to make money out there with this thing, as opposed to just getting pleasure and so on. So that's probably it. FAA dealing with airplanes rather than cars or pipelines or railroads, or, their arguments there. I've sort of just thrown out in the past that with respect to NHTSA, in terms of breaking itself up, the safety from NHTSA leading up to this point has been on crash mitigation, on being able to survive the crash, less harm to us as individual, which is really good. I mean, steering wheels used to go through your chest. I mean, we had cigarette lighters that went through your eye if you hit them.
Your gas tank might blow up,
and your gas tank might blow up. And so, it's really crash mitigation. Whereas the automation, I've always looked at it as, forget mitigation, it's crash avoidance. Okay, you should not the system should not let you get into a position in which you cause the crash. You're responsible. I shouldn't be able to misbehave and tailgate you. I shouldn't be able to cross the double line when there's a truck coming right at me. Cross the double line, no truck coming at me, who cares? But truck coming at me, boom, of course. So there is, to me, a clear different one would, of course, like to not only avoid, you'd like to mitigate if it happens. If God came in here, as I like to say, dropped a meteorite out of the sky in front of you, physics can't help, boom, you die, unfortunately, but it's God's fault, so we can blame her, okay?
Right, and you're absolutely right that NHTSA has they have the 100 series. They've got the like their what they call their crash avoidance regulations. I mean, those are things like it's like lighting and mirrors. It's to it's all assisting the driver. And what we're talking about here is actually replacing drivers. And you're absolutely right. That is something fundamentally different than, what the current 100 series crash avoidance regulations do, what the 200 series crash worthiness regulations do, and then the 300 series post-crash survivability regulations do. And that's, I believe that's why the automakers, or some of the automakers, suggested creating that 600 series, because we are talking about something very different than what NHTSA has done in the past. But like I said, I think that, we face these legacy issues, conflicts in regulation. When they did the audit a few years ago, when Volpe did the audit, almost half of FMVSS, especially if you're talking new novel vehicle designs, potentially prevent conflicts with self-certifying to NHTSA's current 73 Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards. So updating those in a way that allows this technology to be compliant, I think is there, that's why we saw the final rule that is currently on ice under the regulatory freeze that happens when administrations change. But the update to those crash worthiness standards, that was the draft final rule came out early last month, and then was caught up in the freeze. But hopefully that comes out, because that, I think, is exactly the kind of work that NHTSA should be done. And we already have it. That rule is fully baked. So that could be an early win for the new administration to get that off their plate and start looking at these other potential conflicts and sort of move methodically through the existing regulations and find that. I mean, we need to do the same thing at the states, and some states have audited their motor vehicle codes looking for these conflicts. The problem is even the states that have done that haven't gotten around to updating their motor vehicle codes. So I think that is what needs to happen, and we have enough information, I think, where we can make a lot of those decisions right now, and then in the future, the kinds of things that you were talking about, where we would potentially, if we have a new modal administration that does this, or if it's within NHTSA, to actually come up with ADS specific Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards. Hopefully in the future, and hopefully sooner rather than later, we have that kind of information to do that. But I think there's plenty of work in just housekeeping that can be done right now, or at least started right now.
We'll be back with more, but first, this is a good time to remind you about our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. To get more info, head to motoetf.com. On the website, look for a white paper. It's titled The Smart Transportation Revolution. It's under the Insights and News tab. Some great information there to help you make informed decisions about investing. ETFs, as you may know, can be a smart way to spread risk with investments and focus on a particular category of stocks. The site again is motoetf.com. We are back, and Alain, some of the other headlines from the latest Smart Driving Cars newsletter. Salika Talbot has a piece in Forbes titled Driving Jobs, the Future of Autonomous Trucking.
Yeah, and I think Sheila does a good job there, and in fact, she's been looking at this issue with respect to the motor carrier industry and so on. And I think, and she points out that in fact, the folks that think that all of a sudden all the jobs are going to disappear, in fact, she makes good arguments to say no, this is job creation. I mean, what I say to my students is, if you look at Excel, the spreadsheet, how many MBAs did that, unemploy? Because how was that done in the 50s? You had these room full of MBAs with their green eye shades and their crank calculators and their whatever ledgers putting together spreadsheets. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, how many? But somehow the MBAs all found jobs, and much better jobs, and we moved on. So, I don't know if the parallel is completely the same, but of course, I mean, what we have found the technology, while yes, it it moves people around, and there are dislocations, and some people need to be re-educated. And of course, with all this technology, we also have to provide the funds and the abilities to have people change and evolve in the workforce and do that. But in a sense, this is not going to put a bunch of people in the unemployment line, or it should not if we do it well. Hey, if we don't do it well, of course, and anytime we don't do things well, then of course. But so that's why I've included her comments there.
And in the meantime, as you've often pointed out, the technology improves the lifestyles of the drivers that are out there today immensely.
Well, to me, that's the key here. And I keep thinking about the truck driver, 10 hours a day sitting there going down the road, absolutely having to focus to keep this thing between two white lines. And if you, as I like to say, scratch your butt or something like that, you die because they need help.
Well, the news reports are just full of all the pictures today of the all of the big accidents that you see from the snow and the ice that is gripped the country.
And of course,
it's always the trucks that you see.
To me, that that's where this technology, we have not spent enough time on this to have this technology. It shouldn't just warn us. It should keep us from misbehaving or somehow, not having a clue. And you shouldn't be able to speed on ice. Look, sensors that know what the coefficient of friction is between your wheels and the road surface are out there. If you want to exchange information from folks, every time my little light comes on that my wheels slip, I should put out a little broadcast with a GPS location of where I am so that the cars behind us could hear it. What would that take? Absolutely nothing. Okay? Or put up a sign or whatever and do that so that in case I'm clueless, it keeps me from getting in trouble. I mean, why isn't that the focus of the technology? And of course, I've said way too often that, the crashes, the 90% of the crashes aren't because we make mistakes. Okay, it's because we misbehave. We somehow, or I don't know, we're humans, I mean, Mark and you, Fred, are perfect. I understand. But me, whatever, I'm out there, who knows what? I tailgate. Don't let me tailgate. What the heck's it take to know that you're tailgating? I mean, come on. Oh, my privacy and my freedom. I don't know. I mean, that to me, that's the Mark, thoughts on that?
Well, I think I think that this opens the door to a lot of interesting questions. You're absolutely right. I mean, I or at least I agree with you that people who misbehave, and you're right, and that's why I always try to take care to say when we discuss the NHTSA reports that have found the 94% error and misbehavior, and you got to emphasize, because a lot of it is people doing things that they ought not to be doing, and they should know better. And I agree with you that people should face consequences for their bad behavior. Especially
or be bailed out, or be say, cool, you really don't need to go that fast, really. I mean,
right. Well, and to tie it back to Salika's piece, and I think she did a great job of telling, we see all of these these speculative, very pessimistic pieces on the workforce impacts, but it's not at all clear that things are going to be bad. They could be quite good, as she did a great job pointing out. But it's like when people complain about trucks, on the highway, what do they usually talk about? That they go too slow. It's not that, that's the, and I admit, when I get behind, some big rigs on the interstates, I like to go a bit faster than most of them. But, that should be on me and we shouldn't be incentivizing that behavior. And but you at the end there, Alan, you raised a really good point where I think there may be a tension between incentivizing good behavior on the roads for as long as we continue to have human drivers anyway. And then once the tech takes over, and some of these concerns about privacy and things like that, because if the data that we are collecting somehow can't be used to incentivize good behavior, you're potentially short-circuiting what could be a very valuable product of this technological development. So I think we have to balance these things for sure, but we shouldn't go in and say that, if you're out there on a public road, that you have this absolute right to do whatever you want. And that too often we see that. I think that's a bit of a, maybe that's a bit too strong for what advocates of that, something approaching that position actually say. But that's been my sense, is that too often that there's assumed to be a right to do all sorts of bad things on the roads, when I think there's a good case to be made that we should be trying to disincentivize and deter bad behavior.
Yeah, we should. We have to do it well also. I mean, I point out the crossing of the double lines. The system should know that you're crossing a double line, of course. It should also know whether or not there's something coming down the other way. Okay. And if there's nothing coming down the other lane, then, no harm, no foul. Okay. Let play go on. Okay. Maybe I have a good who knows? I mean, why sit there? Why be so brutal about the enforcement? Okay. In times when who doesn't really matter. Okay. But when it does matter, darn it, the darn thing should come in there and say, yo, relax. Okay. So how to do that well, of course, is, oh my goodness.
And as we've seen in automated traffic enforcement and the debate that's happened around that over the years, I mean, that is, and this sort of, it got some new attention this last summer when, we had a lot of people talking about racial disparities in policing and traffic enforcement. And in principle, automated traffic enforcement would be a great way to eliminate, or at least at the very least reduce that kind of racial bias that was identified there. But you often see localities completely blow their credibility with their constituents by trying to maximize revenue rather than to deter bad behavior. So you've got to make sure that you're not turning these types of solutions that offer a lot of promise into just, a computerized speed trap. So how to get that right? Tough one.
Not easy. I mean, I with respect to the speed traps, I always liked what England did with respect to their, what they call, black zones or something like that. They publicize the fact that up ahead they have a speed camera. They tell you. Why? Because there's a reason for the speed camera. You should slow down, otherwise you're going to die, probably, is the reason. Not that they're out there collecting dollars associated with getting you, you went over the speed limit. Okay. So, that's, to me, I would call a much more mature approach to doing that, as you very well pointed out, and what you said. I mean, we have to do these things well, of course. Well, it's tough to do, though, but that's why we have the discussions, right?
A couple of other quick headlines to touch on, Alan. The Waymo, well, they're not coming to Trenton just yet, but they are going to test robo-taxis in San Francisco. This is pretty limited, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're doing what Uber did for a while, and what a lot of other folks did. They are just testing. They aren't out there operating. And I guess I'm kind of in my comment, I say, where are you testing? If you're testing where there's good Mooney and the BART service, then what are you doing? Provide another alternative for those who could very well pay for Uber and tip the Uber driver really well? Or are you in places in San Francisco in which your form of mobility could really improve the quality of life for folks who don't have good mobility? So the question is, where in San Francisco? And, and also I'm not necessarily a fan of the last mile stuff for rich folks, who could afford an Uber. I'm more interested in providing mobility for the driverless. To me, the value of the driverless is to provide mobility for folks who don't have good mobility now, and you can do it affordably. That should be the focus, and hopefully that's what Waymo does have as a focus, and why I want to invite them to Trenton, because that's where a lot of folks like that, or there are a lot of Trentons in this world. There are parts of San Francisco that are like Trenton. And I hope that's where they're doing it. But anyway, that's my little.
I think they know. I think they know about your invite.
I know. I mean, I've made it. I guess whatever. Yeah.
Well, one thing you are a fan of, I know, is Super Cruise from GM, and they're putting it in new versions of the Chevy Bolt, the compact SUV. The new one's at 250 miles of range, $32,000 price tag. So Super Cruise is going to be included, but it doesn't have GM's new Ultium battery technology.
Well, I guess they're doing some things, and why don't they make it available in Chevys? Why don't they just put it in Chevys? How much does it really cost them? I mean, how about Buicks? How about not? Come on, GM. It really is a good system. Why? Unfortunately, because you're looking at the driver and making sure that the driver is engaged. And if the driver's not engaged, then you take away the toys, which unfortunately is maybe, a little bit too heavy-handed. But in the sense, if we're going to misbehave with this thing, we should have our toys taken away from us.
Ford has dissolved its roughly 7.5% stake in Velodyne LiDAR. You point out that there may be a reason for that, an acquisition they'd made before.
Well, they bought Princeton Lightwave, and the competing LiDAR manufacturer and so on. So I guess, I don't know. They must think that Princeton Lightwave's doing a good job, and who knows? I don't know. But Velodyne's done a great job. They basically they're the ones that brought this technology to us in the DARPA challenges, and I'm sure Velodyne will continue to do well.
And what's going on with the automobile manufacturers? It's really in high gear now. Jaguar announcing it will be all electric by 2025, 4 years from now. Land Rover soon after. These companies seem to be moving really fast.
Yeah, and Ford said, I think today that, by 2030 in Europe, I don't know. Yeah, I guess. But unfortunately, my comment in there is that I don't know if anybody in Texas is going to buy one. We'll have to wait and see. I mean, Texas just went through. Maybe they all have short memory and went through. Oh my goodness, we don't got no electricity, and so we ain't going to be able to go anywhere. I guess.
The gas stations are pretty much out of business too if they don't have power. I think so.
Yeah, I guess you can't pump. You got to need the. I guess so. I don't know. Maybe, whatever. We have to do something about our electric grid if we're really going to do this. Okay.
And how the power is produced that will charge these electric vehicles.
Where it's going to come from, because this is all marginal power, and right now marginal power comes from coal. And until we, close all the coal plants, it's going to continue to come from coal, and and so on and so forth. So I don't want to go there. I mean, that's just talk about making sausage. That's a tough one, Mark. Right? We won't get dragged into that one.
Yeah, unfortunately, I know next to nothing on the energy policy, so I can stay out of this.
Oh, I know next to nothing too. But I don't stay out of it.
All I know about energy is I like it.
Yeah,
it's good.
Hey, energy's been good, since forever, for 50 million years of human existence or whatever. Energy's always been good. Energy's good.
Well,
when
Marc,
when you have it where you want it, okay?
Yeah.
That's the key.
If the lights come on, the heat comes on, that's very, very good. So,
and if I'm moving, I need something to keep me moving. So I got to get it there, or I got to carry it with me, or hope I ate enough so that my feet can continue to go one ahead of the other one, so I can move with my leg.
Well, our thoughts are with all the people who are suffering through all of this. It's just terrible.
Yeah, in Texas.
Especially.
It's Texas, but we can go to Cancun. Ooh, ouch. That's Ted Cruz. He's a Princeton graduate. Oh my goodness. That's unfortunate.
Well, Marc, I'm going to get out of this one. Marc, we really want to thank you for taking the time with us. Really
thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Fred and Alain. It was a great time.
And there's more information on the Reason Foundation at reason.org, O-R-G. Thank you to our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF. The ticker symbol for the ETF is MOTO, and more information is available at motoetf.com. You can find us at smartdrivingcar.com, also on Anchor FM, Spotify, TuneIn, Apple, Google, Spreaker. Amazon has us in their podcasts, SoundCloud, and more. Ask your smart speaker to play us. You can find my tech reports at techstination.com. I'm Fred Fishkin along with Alain Kornhauser. Thank you for listening or watching, and please stay safe.
Stay safe. Get your vaccine if you're eligible. Don't forget to do that. Don't opt out. And Marc, so great to have you.